content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. Is evil real? That is the real question. Fiction or not, could evil really influence those so deeply that a normal loving soul does the unthinkable and unimaginable to another human being that it just shocks you to your core? Could these heinous acts we've seen and heard about over hundreds of years be the works of a psychotic psychopaths that play the devil made me do it card, or is there something more sinister at play? To really showcase this theory or reason, we have Jack the Ripper, H. Holmes, and an exorcism all wrapped up in a book called The Unwelcomed, The Curious Case of Clara Fowler, with author Ron Felber. Ron Felber was educated at Georgetown University. He has written fiction and nonfiction books, including The Double Life of the Mafia Doctor, Mojave Incident, and The Man in the Intermediate Value. He began his career writing stories for true detective magazines while working as a federal marshal. The Unwelcome is perhaps the most frightening book of demonic possession ever. As real and convincing as the medical case history is based upon, Dr. Fletcher, award-winning author of To Hunt a Holy Man. A hugely influential account that qualifies as jaw-dropping. Quote William Peter Blatty, the author of The Exorcist. The Unwelcome should be read with an open mind and all lights on in the house. George Norrie, host, Coast to Coast AM. It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. Well, tonight I have a special guest, Ron Felber, who is the author of The Unwelcomed, The Curious Case of Clara Fowler, who is a Maxy Award 2024 Book of the Year winner. Now, talking about The Unwelcomed, now this is a fictional kind of murder mystery type, suspense type of book, but it's based off of true events. So, can you give us a start? Like, I saw that Jack the Ripper's involved, H. Holmes is involved, which I love, and I love Jeff Mudgett. I don't know if you spoke with him, but he's a descendant of H. Holmes, and the tie, the tie between Jack the Ripper.
That's when I stopped believing in genetics, I hope.
Yeah, right. I mean, could you imagine? But okay, so tell us about the Unwelcomed, The Curious Case of Clara Fowler. What is the book about? How does it go into the vein of not only paranormal and kind of the spooky side of things, but also like murder? And I mean, you got both sides of this. So kind of take us through the book and kind of let us know what you came up with to kind of answer that question. Is evil real?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Or is it the devil made me do it type of thing? So I'll hand it off to you.
Sure. You know, I got this story. It's an interesting way I got the story. I was a student at Georgetown University when The Exorcist was being filmed. And so Bill Blatty, William Peter Blatty, the author of The Exorcist, and William Friedkin, the director, were there. And, you know, they had their fog machines and it was all cordoned off. And I was a writer even then. And this would be back in 1972. And I had my first novel, and I was hopeful that I could get it to William Peter Blatty because he went to Georgetown as well. And my sort of sales point was, you know, I'm a student just like you were a student. You wanted to be a writer. I want to be a writer. Please help me.
Mm-hmm.
so, so he did. Actually, it was really, really kind of unique. We met. Wasn't easy, but we met. And part of when we met, going into things a little bit, was he turned over one of the cases that he had uncovered during his research for The Exorcist. And this was a
Oh.
story of Clara Fowler, a young Radcliffe student who
Mm-hmm.
comes to a general practitioner in Boston. And this is set up in Beacon Hill, the really wealthy, well-to-do area,
Mm-hmm.
particularly at that time. And that would be 1898 to 1904 is how long this case lasted. And she shows all the signs of demonic possession. So Dr.
Oh.
Morton Prince, who is one of the foremost physicians in the world at the time, along with William James, who was the first person to teach abnormal psychology at Harvard University Medical School. So this is the creme de la creme in terms of intellectuals, scientists, and psychotherapists. Well,
Okay.
anyway, it turns out that that Prince sees this as that she is a victim. He sees her as a victim of a cataclysmic ordeal,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a trauma that created an illness called dissociation. Some
Okay.
of the other members of the team he formed said this is a classic case of demonic possession, and so that's the gist of the opening, anyway.
Mm-hmm. So now taking that information, okay, you have possible possession.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have the Exorcist, the author of the Exorcist. Like, I can't even imagine like what you wanted to do with all that information. But yeah, you get this information handed to you. So how does this information that you get fit into a narrative with Jack the Ripper, H. Holmes? Because now you have a girl that's a case of possible possession. How
Yes.
does that carry into a fictional? How do you carry that into a narrative?
Yes. I don't want to give too much away, but
Oh no, no, no.
I will elaborate on that. So the trauma that Prince finds through
Okay.
hypnosis and discovery is
Mhm.
that her father was a sort of beast. I mean, he was a wife beater and a terrible
Oh.
abusive alcoholic, the father of Clara Fowler. And
Mhm.
and there's a detective involved, a city marshal named Hilliard, Rufus
Mhm.
Bassett Hilliard. He's the city marshal. He's the city marshal that investigated the Lizzie Borden murders in Fall River, and
Okay.
also the Juan Barrow murders that just 4 miles away from where Lizzie murdered her father and mother with an axe. Just four
Mhm.
miles away, 6 months later, a farmhand named Juan Carriaro brutal axe murder of his boss's wife in the kitchen. So
Mhm.
he had investigated both of those. He believed that that Clara's father, John Fowler, the abusive alcoholic,
Mhm.
had murdered two of her siblings. Two of her
Oh.
siblings, Charles and Betsy, died under mysterious circumstances. The
Okay.
coroner thought that perhaps they'd been strangled. And
Okay.
so Rufus Bassett Hilliard, they call him Bassett as a nickname because he's on cases and will not let go like a basset hound. And
Yeah.
so he goes to Boston to
Mhm.
get information from Clara about her father and her siblings who had died. He
Okay.
thinks that she probably, because it was a small household, knows exactly how they died, knows that the
Mhm.
father did it, and perhaps can testify against him in court and corroborate the coroner's suspicions. And he
Mhm.
can put John Fowler, who he thinks is a monster, in jail.
Yeah.
How does
Well,
Jack the Ripper come up?
uh-huh.
Jack the Ripper actually writes Bassett Hilliard. Now, again, because of the Lizzie Borden murder was, global news. So
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper actually wrote a letter to
No
uh,
way.
to Bassett Hilliard. It's on display, as a matter of fact, in Fall River, where Clara Fowler was born and raised. And it basically tells him there's more than one killer. You're looking for one killer, there's more than one. And that's the letter. It's on display, as a matter of fact, in the Fall River Museum.
Oh, if I'm going to Fall River, I'm definitely going to look at that because, and that has been kind of a theory. Jack the Ripper, like, is it like a group, like a secret society that's working together? Because there's always that especially that Victorian era of
Yes.
secret societies and kind of weird underground stuff going on.
Satanic cults.
Yeah,
At the time, spiritualism, there were 9 million spiritualists in the United States and Europe at the time. They included Charles Dickens, the famous writer, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, Madame Curie, who was the founder of X-rays, a physicist named Richard Lodge, who was one of the premier scientists of his day. They were all spiritualists. They believed that mediums and psychics could contact the dead. So the idea of devil worship and this good and bad, at the time.
Yeah, I mean, because the only thing that I could really think of in modern time that's very similar is kind of the smiley face killer. There's been theories that it's kind of a group of underground people that go around and they kill people and leave their mark, and that's kind of like the Jack the Ripper. There has been theories of that, and if that's the case, and if he wrote a letter saying there's more than one, I wouldn't dismiss it. You know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't be far off, especially in the time and era. So now with Clara being, obviously she does have some trauma she's dealing with. So they think she's possessed. More than likely, it's a dissociative.
And I should really tell you, actually, of the people that studied her, and there was Morton Prince, there was George Waterman, who was also a Harvard Medical School graduate, his assistant, William James, who was probably the most prominent outside of Sigmund Freud, a psychiatrist in the world at the time. Then there was a Richard Hodgson, who was president of the Psychical Society, Research Society in Boston, and Leonora Piper, who was a notable, renowned psychic at the time. So the team that studied this woman were the very prominent scientists, and also a couple of spiritualists, just to get that point of view.
And so what did they conclude? Like, if they were getting all this information, trying to figure out what's going on with her, what did they come to a conclusion at all, or something close to say, it could be more than likely this, or she needs this to help her feel better, or
well, she was actually cured.
Oh, she was cured. Okay.
Yes,
So like cured. What was the cure? I mean, like, was it an exorcism? Was it medication?
There was an exorcism, and I'll tell you, here's what Morton Prince has to say about it. I think here he talks about. By the way, Clara Fowler wanted to be a nun. So she was at Radcliffe College, but ultimately she had visitations from Jesus Christ and visitations from the Virgin Mary for her whole life. And she thought, like the girls at Fatima and others, that she had a religious calling and wanted to fulfill that. So, so then, of course, she starts having these symptoms, and this second consciousness comes out that literally hates her, tortures her, tries to kill her. But here's what Prince says on some of these things. This is his words. She saw the Virgin Mary in a marked way, describing her appearance, using her hands to point out the positions of the entities involved and their surroundings as if they stood before her. She regarded herself as possessed in the same way that a person in the Bible is said to be possessed, beset her on every hand. As she walked through the streets, an endless procession of black-robed figures accompanied her, some with familiar faces, most with countenances that changed horribly moment to moment. Now, as regards the exorcism, putting my finger to her forehead, I held up a cross, reciting the words from the rites of exorcism. The effect was remarkable. She shrunk from me like Mephistopheles, shrinking from the cross, cursing God and the saints and all things holy, screaming that it made a terrible, painful sensation run through her body. She feared it more than anything.
Wow.
And just to give you some symptoms, this is a woman whose face would literally remold, you know,
Oh
into
my
a
God.
different face. Her voice would be this deep, guttural, booming voice. She spoke in languages that she couldn't possibly know, exhibited
Wow.
tremendous strength, even though she was probably 100 pounds or so, and
Yeah.
ill. You know, tremendous,
Yeah.
tremendous strength, and just expressed unbridled rage at anything that was religious, violent to the
Hmm.
point where they had to restrain her and knock her out with ether.
Oh, wow.
Even when she was knocked out with ether, however, the demonic presence was wide awake
Right.
and knew everything that was going on. So this
Hmm.
second consciousness was awake 24/7,
Hmm.
experienced no pain, no illness, had no need of food, was never fatigued, and used all of that, knew every thought of Clara Fowler, and
Yeah.
he used that against her to wear
Yeah.
her body down so that it could take over.
Yeah. And it's funny that we're talking about this because, like, Dave and I, we just binge watched all the Omen movies.
Oh, really?
And it's, yeah, yeah. And, it's kind of strange because, like, I'm looking at it as more of the kind of true crime aspect of it. He's
Yes,
looking at more of the paranormal. But when you look at these kind of cases, even though they put these fictional stories around them, there's always some truth in there. And it's amazing how much true crime and, like, evil demonic type of stuff are always kind of side by side. You know what I mean? Like, there's always,
I know
it's not
exactly
just
what you
a,
mean.
yeah, it's not just a case of somebody just having a grumpy day. I mean, it's, these people, if it's a disassociative thing, and, it could be some evil influence causing that.
Well, I
A lot.
believe that people are possessed. I used to transport federal prisoners. I was a deputy sheriff for
Hmm.
some years, and I met hitmen that killed 80 people. I met terrorists. I met motorcycle guys that propane torched young girls to death while they were chained to a tree. So
Right.
these are more than just crimes. And my
Yeah.
my feeling is that it's a certain point in time, uh, people become evil
Hmm.
and literally become the devil. They become the devil, the Jack the Rippers, the H. Holmes, the motorcycle guy I was telling you about, Ted Bundy. I think there's a level, just like
Uh-huh.
in the good side, like Mother Teresa or some of the saints, Saint Francis of Assisi or whatever, live these holy lives. There's
Yep.
dedicate themselves to God. There are others that dedicate themselves to the devil, and that's just a fact.
Right. And well, like Ted Bundy, they even said, I think it was like in court, like his face would kind of change in his eyes. And they even said too, there was times where, like, if he would, it's almost like he was kind of seething a little bit. There was
Mhm.
actually, like, some people said he smelt like sulfur.
By
Like,
the way, the most interesting thing of all, I wrote a book about
mhm.
alien abduction, and it did
Okay.
very well. It's sort of a seminal work on it. It's called the Mojave Incident, and the connection between alien abduction and demonic possession is huge. Even
Yep.
the language that Clara Fowler, this book is based on transcripts, by the way, from the psychiatric sessions. Morton Prince
Okay.
had a stenographer, so almost all the dialogue is exactly
How
real.
it was said. Yep.
Yeah,
It
it's
was real
pulled
dialogue.
from those things. But for example, in every case, the demonic presence, whether it's the aliens that abducted the Hesses in Mojave incident, or Clara
Hmm.
Fowler, as she described the demon, or Prince describes the demon as it comes into her body, uh,
Right.
the descriptions are very similar. It's always accompanied, and they say this, by the smell of sulfur. And the
Hmm.
other thing is, in almost all these cases, I think I'd heard from, I think John Mack gave an interview, the Harvard professor of psychology, that in some 400 cases of alien abduction, the alien abduction was truncated, stopped, because people prayed or
Hmm.
asked help from Jesus or God or whomever. So there
Hmm.
is a religious aspect to this clearly. The visitations
Yes.
for Clara, and in the case of the Hesses, in the darkest moments of their abduction, when they thought they
Right.
were dead and in hell, uh, an angelic presence came to them and they called it their comforter. And this presence said, you will make it through this. Just have faith. You'll be okay. You'll come out on the other side of this. So there are many, many connections between those two.
Right. And I mean, it's almost like on our side, we're dealing with stuff, but they're working, evil, good and evil's working in the background. They're fighting it out back there. But yeah, exactly. So it's like you get this dissociative kind of idea. So we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, I kind of want to discuss that, like some of these dissociative cases, like blaming the devil for murder. I mean, is it something that's really evil? If it's a dissociative thing, like Clara, maybe they're having these blips of moments of like where something just takes over them. They don't even know they don't even know they're doing it. You know what I mean? So we'll talk about that. We'll take a quick break.
All right, my darklings. Summer is here, and the Paranormal 60 swag shop has all your supernatural summer must-haves, from comfortable and breathable tanks for both men and women, to a paranormal investigator's must-have, a Bluetooth speaker for those EVP burst sessions, or to just lay in a cemetery at night and listen to some heavy metal with your paranormal peeps. And don't forget the Paranormal 60 sling bag, which you can put all your awesome paranormal investigating tools in it while you investigate. But don't forget to grab your Paranormal 60 travel mug. It's important to stay hydrated in those dank and damp hot places y'all investigate during the summer. So make sure you check out the swag shop. Just go to paranormal60.com, click the swag shop tab at the top of the page, and then just check out the Paranormal 60 podcast collection is where you can find all these supernatural summer must-haves. And remember, kids, stay spooky.
Okay, and we're back. Now, before the break, I asked the question, and wanted to discuss some cases that have a similar kind of vein of, possession. I mean, they did do that one trial. Ed and Lorraine Warren were involved, where they actually used possession as a defense for the guy in court. And so how do you think something like that could really kind of infiltrate, kind of get into the justice system as more of I wouldn't say maybe a psychological aspect of the court system during trials and things? Could it be considered, like possession, a mental illness? Like they kind of poo-poo it as kind of, fringe out there, it's not real type of thing. But, if something like that were to happen and somebody brought that to the case, could they really use that as a legitimate mental illness defense? And
well, they did actually in the case of Lizzie Borden.
And
interesting enough, Lizzie Borden always said she was innocent. It was the only thing she was consistent about, is that she had no knowledge of these murders. And really, Juan Corriero, who committed the axe murders not far from her, and within 6 months of the first set of murders, had no memory of the murders either. And after he axed this woman to death, literally went to town and bought a pair of shoes. It was like a missing time. And that's not unusual. By the way, Clara Fowler frequently had missing time. And during that missing time is when the demonic presence would take over.
Right. And that's what, and they have cases where people say that they're like, I don't even know how I killed this person. I didn't do it. And they honestly feel like they didn't do it. So is it is it really truly evil? Is it somebody taking over? I don't know a lot of people, if it's having drugs, are they more susceptible to that kind of dissociative behavior? Things like that. So, we've had these cases, and you have the satanic panic that came up in the 90s and things like that. So from the 1800s, or during this Victorian time to now, do you think there's been some progress with the supernatural, spiritual aspect of true crime and murder, and using that in court cases? Do you think we're advanced enough to do that?
Yeah, I think that more and more, if you look at the cornerstones of what
Mhm.
we perceive as the world, one of them is evolution.
Mhm.
That's Darwin's evolution. And the other is Newtonian physics. You know, you drop an apple, and this is the framework we see the world through.
Mhm.
But in the end, evolution, that whole theory has sort of been put to the side by serious people. You know, where's the fossil chain? You know, show me how this happened. Uh, Francis Crick, who was the founder of DNA and won the Nobel Prize for Science in 1958, said the odds of evolution being true would be the equivalent of a tornado going through a junkyard, leaving behind a 747 jet that takes off and flies to Europe. That's the odds that it's true.
Oh,
So
okay.
if you take that away and put it to the side, and then you look at quantum mechanics from Max Planck, Einstein, and whatnot, totally disproves Darwinian, or I'm sorry, Newtonian physics, that we have no real idea of what the world is. And then we see
Mhm.
that there are probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of universes. So my point is that serious scientists now and astrophysicists are looking at the world and saying, you know, there is a zero possibility that we know what reality is. Now,
Mhm.
given that, who's to say, and my own belief is that what we see is not reality, and that reality is spiritual, and that
Right.
there's a constant battle that goes on for the souls of humans on
Mhm.
the from God and from demons, or from a diabolical force. And this struggle goes on, and we mirror it in our lives. So if I were a lawyer, and there
Mhm.
were a murderer, let's say Juan Carriero, and he said, I have no knowledge of this, even to the point where casually he goes and buys a pair of shoes, meaning he really
Right.
doesn't have any knowledge. I guess I'd hypnotize him, or have him
Mhm.
hypnotized and retrogressed, and see what that yielded. But in the end, I mean, I would argue a case that demonic possession is very real, and that
Mhm.
there are cases that demonstrate this. You know, these are the few that we know about. There's probably hundreds, thousands that we have no idea, where people do things with no knowledge. And maybe it's a mental illness, it's a fugue of some sort. But on the other hand, you know, for example, there was a satanic cult in Fall River in 1979 and 1980, three going to
Mhm.
death. And the cult said they did it because Satan told them to do it.
Right.
So that's a kind of real defense.
Right. And but it's just like, is it genuine? I mean, like some people just like, oh, the devil made me do it. Ugh, but it's like, is there something deeper going on within that person? Now, I do believe people are evil because who would just randomly go up to somebody and hack them up with an axe and then go buy a pair of shoes? Like
Exactly.
there's no reason. Like if I had to, I'm not saying I would, but I'm just saying,
Hmm.
like, if I had to murder somebody, it would be because 'cause I'm defending myself or my family. I'm not
Sure.
just gonna go randomly up and just kill
Right.
somebody for no reason. So that's why I think true crime and murder is so intriguing because there's no logic, there's no reason. We're trying to find it. And, when you have cases of possession, you have the spiritual aspect mixed in there. It makes it even more complicated, you
Hmm.
know, for the person that, may not be not knowledgeable, but they're not, they don't believe it or they're more technical or
Hmm.
scientific. They don't want to hear any other type of theories or outside influences. So,
Hmm.
but I think when you have cases like this, you really have to look at all aspects of the mind. Like, why are they doing this? What is going on that's triggering these outbursts? I don't even know how somebody can morph their face. I mean, obviously, if that's happening, that has to be supernatural,
Well,
paranormal,
even
because
eye
there's,
color changes in some of these situations.
yeah,
So,
yeah, and that's, yeah, Ted Bundy, his eyes would change
well,
and
I'll
like
tell
he
you,
would smell
H.H.
it.
Holmes, maybe you know this and maybe you don't, but H.H. Holmes was in prison and was going to be
Hmm.
hung. And I don't know how long he was in prison before he hung, but it was a matter of months at least.
Yeah.
By the time they hung him, The hangman, the minister, the people that walked him to the gallows didn't think it was H.H. Holmes. He looked entirely different. And as a matter of fact, they were so convinced he was possessed by devils, which he claimed himself he was, that they buried him under 10 feet of concrete.
Yep. And actually, Jeff Mudgett on his show, he had a show about his book Bloodline. We'll definitely have to have Jeff Mudgett on. I love Jeff. He's great. He's got a great story. But they actually opened up the vault or the concrete slab to see if his body was even in there, because there was rumors that he didn't die, that they swapped bodies. So there's like all these weird theories about it in urban legends and lore, but the truth is that obviously H.H. Holmes had some mental issues going on, because he would literally hunt people. I mean, like, right. He would hunt people and, bring them back to his castle and do ungodly things to a human body that I can't even imagine. So it's just like, obviously something has to be, because that's not normal for a human being to treat other human beings like that. So that's where it's, so like a book like this and showcasing the duality of evil and good, and putting that with true crime. That's what true crime's about. I mean, it's basically reality.
Absolutely.
Evil in reality. That's evil in reality.
It's a deeper level of the crime. Beneath the crime, there's it's like an iceberg. There's the tip of the iceberg, but really the depth of it is the real story.
Right. And because I sit back and I look at some of these cases, and especially like the ones like, Jack the Ripper, it's like, it's not like they're mutilating people. So that, to me, that is extreme mental illness or something evil influencing somebody, because it's not normal.
Actually, one of the great things about the Unwelcomed, the curious case of Clara Fowler, is that this comes from real and true transcripts. As a matter of fact, this was all kept at the Harvard Medical Library, but Prince wrote a book, this is from 1906, about this case, and it documents everything. So she was studied. This isn't like some, urban legend. She was studied by Harvard psychiatrists and psychotherapists. But during the course of things, and this might interest you, the demonic presence is sort of there, and the doctor's asking questions. So basically, the doctor asks, why? And this is the answer. Why do I bother with a pathetic bitch like Clara Fowler? I do it because it's my job. God is dead. Jesus is in hell. Moment to moment, we fight for the souls of humans, sometimes by the thousands, often one at a time. Each a small victory, and we celebrate those victories, he swore. Truly we do. And then the doctor says, and where does God fit into this? A tired general, incompetent, blithering. Angels have lost their confidence in him, knowing the power of the forces I command. I think the English would say he let his side down. Another secret. Most are borderline, but occasionally we come upon a special case. Borden, Holmes, the Ripper, countless others whose names you'll never know. And these, by their own choosing, become me. Evil incarnate, prowling the earth with one purpose, to reduce God's so-called creations to the brutish animals I know them to be.
Wow. That's amazing that's documented. So that's good that they really kind of looked at it in a scientific way versus just a religious throwing a priest in the room and trying to, to get that.
Prince was in competition with Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud was psychoanalysis and whatnot. Then there were the spiritualists, and Prince would be what you'd call a behavioralist today. He believed something like schizophrenia or Tourette's syndrome was a mental illness caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, or a deformity in the brain, or a lesion in the brain, but that basically there were physical, natural explanations, even for this case. That's what he believed. The other point of view is Richard Hodgson, who was the president of the Psychical Research Society. his point was, well, look, we've got a woman that talks in languages that, ancient languages, Greek, Aramaic. No way she could possibly know. And she's clairvoyant. She just tells people what's going to happen and threatens them. She has the strength of 10 people. Her face changes. She speaks in different voices and in different languages.
Right.
The odds of all of those symptoms happening to one person at the same time, he argued, is far-fetched. It's easier to assume that there are cases historically that go on for thousands of years back to the Bible, and that's what we have in front of us.
Right. Well, the Unwelcomed, hey, I'll have a link in the description for today's episode. But if you buy the book, please rate and review. Ron is a wonderful author, and we're definitely going to have you on. But yes, please rate and review the book. The link will be in today's program guide. So coming to a conclusion, so when you wrapping up this narrative, and one thing I do like about historical, like, for example, the movie Titanic. The Rose and Jack story, that was all fictional, but they put a fictional story within a real event.
Yes.
And one thing I do like about those type of books and movies is that, especially with something like Clara, you have a lot of technical talk, medical talk. Sometimes you get lost in that and you're not really grasping what the story is about. So putting a nice narrative around it, getting that human feel to it, it really helps you understand what Clara was going through and what this possession and how it can intertwine into the human psyche and cause people to be evil. So I do really love having it as a fictional narrative because it helps you kind of engage better, and I think people can relate to it more. Now, do you have a website or anything that people can contact you and check out all your books?
Yeah, sure. It's Ron Felber, FELBER.com. Very simple, and that's my website. And of course, the book is available, The Unwelcomed, the Curious Case of Clara Fowler, on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever books are sold.
Yeah, I'll definitely have a link for that. I'll have a link for your website. So please get The Unwelcomed, The Curious Case of Clara Fowler. Or Fowler. I don't know why I want to call her Flower. Maybe she's just pretty in my mind. But yeah, Clara Fowler. And then, hey, tell me if you like the book. I've already had some of my listeners contact me. I've already bought books that I've had on with authors, and they love the book. So I'd love to give you the feedback as well, Ron. That way you know that your audience is really getting engaged. But we'll definitely have you on for another true crime book here in the future.
Sure.
Do you have any events or anything that you're going to be a part of that's coming up, book signings?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've been doing a lot on the radio and on television. I'm going to be on Beyond Belief, which is the Gaia TV network. And that'll happen, I think, in July. I'm scheduled to go out to Colorado and do that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Ron, for your time, and we'll definitely have you back on. And thank you for listening to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.
Thank you, Winnie.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.